Welcome to the deep dive. If you're looking for a shortcut to getting genuinely well-informed on some really specialized subjects, you are definitely in the right place.
You are.
Today, we are on a truly granular mission. We're navigating the, let's say, intricate workflow of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office.
We are jumping right into the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure, the MPEP, as you probably know it, to understand one very specific but critically important rule.
That's right. Our focus is Chapter 2300.
Which deals with interference and derivation proceedings. And within that, we are zeroing in on Section 2302.
Which is all about the strict requirement to consult an interference practice specialist or an IPS.
Exactly.
So the core problem this section is trying to solve is, it sounds simple on its face. What happens when two different applicants try to claim the exact same invention?
And that collision is what's formally known as an interference.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just a classic case where you need centralized expertise.
Because it just doesn't happen that often, right?
Almost never. These interference cases are incredibly rare. We're talking less than 1% of all patent applications.
Wow.
So, the typical patent examiner just isn't expected to be an expert in these really detailed, almost historical legal procedures.
That's the key then. The system knows how complex it is, so instead of making every examiner learn this procedure they'll almost never use, they delegate.
They delegate it to the IPS. The IPS is that single point of contact in a technology center who makes sure everything is consistent, everything is accurate before these cases even get near the Board of Patent Appeals and Interferences.
They're sort of the institutional memory.
That's a great way to put it. They're the memory and the first quality check. They handle the messy legal history so the examiner can just focus on their day-to-day work.
Okay, before we dive into the rules the IPS enforces, we do want to give a quick shout out.
Yes, a special thank you to Mike Shepard. He's the creative director who organized this entire MPEP audio series.
And of course, the necessary disclaimer.
Right. This analysis of the MPEP was summarized using AI tools, so while we've done our best, it is for educational purposes only. It is not legal advice.
Definitely not. For authoritative guidance, you absolutely have to consult the official MPEP, a qualified instructor, or, of course, a registered patent practitioner.
Please do.
Okay, let's unpack this mechanism. If these cases are so rare, why is it mandatory to talk to an IPS? Is it really worth having these specialists, or is it just, bureaucracy?
Oh, it's absolutely worth it. It's hard policy, and it's all about standardization. An examiner is legally required. They must consult the IPS before even suggesting an interference might exist.
Then if they didn't?
The board would just be flooded with incorrectly framed cases, poorly documented cases. It would be a massive waste of judicial time. The IPS is the one who decides if a formal referral is even warranted.
So the IPS is less of an arbitrator and more of a quality control filter for the board.
Exactly.
A filter. So if they do give it the green light, what's the paper trail look like? Does it trigger a formal notice?
It does. It triggers a formal notice, and it requires some pretty high-level administrative buy-in. The referral has to go out with a completed Form PTO-850.
The PTO-850.
Right, and that's the official referral document.
Yeah.
And critically, it needs a signature from either the IPS or the Technology Center director.
So that one signature really elevates the whole thing.
It ensures that central oversight is always maintained.
And that oversight is key. How does the IPS keep things uniform across the entire USPTO?
They're in constant communication with the administrative patent judges, the APJs.
The ones who are actually on the board.
The very same. They stay up to date on every little practice change, every new legal precedent. And by arranging these consultations, the IPS makes sure every examiner is applying the same uniform standard. It's knowledge centralization in real time.
This is where it gets really interesting for me, because we're shifting from who handles the case to how they decide it. And we are talking about pre-AIA law here. The American Invents Act changed a lot, but this section of the MPEP covers older applications under 35 U.S.C. Section 102G.
Right. And that law prioritized the date of invention, not just when you filed.
A totally different legal universe. So what are the specific rules for these old-school priority fights?
Exactly. We're talking about who actually conceived the idea and reduced it to practice first. That requires some very disciplined steps. There are 5 main practices for the examiner to follow.
Okay, lay out practice number 1 for us.
Immediate consultation. The second an examiner thinks there might be a conflict, they have to consult the IPS. Right away.
No waiting.
No waiting. This stops the examiner from making a procedural mistake right at the start. And the IPS might then immediately check in with a designated APJ to get an expert opinion.
Okay. What about the most common scenario, where the applications aren't perfectly in sync and one is obviously closer to being a patent than the other?
That's practice 2. People often call it the one ready rule.
The one ready rule. I like that.
So if two applications claim the same invention, but only one is actually ready for allowance, meaning all the rejections are gone,
It's good to go.
it's good to go. That application should proceed to issue as a patent. No delay, no suspension.
I see the efficiency there. You don't hold up a perfectly good patent just because someone else is still arguing with the examiner.
Exactly. The other applicant gets a short window to get their application in order, but the main principle is do not delay. Don't suspend a clear path to a patent.
Okay, so this is where the calendar becomes really important. What happens if both applications are ready to go? Practice 3 brings in a time limit, right?
Does. Practice 3 is about close filing dates. If both applications are ready for allowance and their filing dates are within 6 months of each other,
6 months, that's specific.
very specific.
Yeah.
Then an application versus application interference may be suggested. But that's only if the person who filed later can meet the requirements of 37 CFR 41.2022.
Why that 6-month cutoff? What's the thinking behind that?
It's a really powerful administrative tool. If the gap is small, the USPTO is willing to go through the whole complex interference process to find the true first inventor.
But if the gap is wide,
If the gap is wide, and that brings us to practice 4, the burden on the junior party, the later filer, becomes immediate and very heavy.
so let's talk about practice 4. Filing dates are distant, more than 6 months apart. How does the system handle that?
In that case, the earlier filed application just issues as a patent immediately. The later application is then automatically rejected based on that brand new patent.
So it flips the burden entirely.
Completely. The junior party now has to make that required priority showing under 37 CFR 41.202 ETI to overcome what is now a prior art rejection.
Okay, you've mentioned that regulation a few times now. 37 CFR 41.2022. For anyone listening, what is that required showing? What do they actually have to prove?
This is where we get into the heart of pre-AIA law. The showing means the junior inventor has to provide actual evidence. We're talking authenticated lab notebooks, witness statements, documents, to prove they either conceived of the invention and reduced it to practice before the senior party's filing date.
Wow.
It's the hard evidence you need to challenge that priority claim.
So it's not a bureaucratic issue anymore. It's a full-on legal battle over who really invented first, with documents to prove it.
That's it, exactly. And the last rule, practice 5, just hammers home that anti-delay mindset.
Right.
The MPEP says you should not suspend prosecution just because an interference might happen down the road. Any suspension is rare and has to be approved by the IPS. The default is always move forward.
That is a really powerful set of rules. Let's make it more concrete. Walk us through that example of 2 inventors with the same chemical compound. How would rules 2 and 4 play out?
Sure. So imagine inventor A files their application on January 1st, 2024.
Okay.
And inventor B files on December 1st, 2024. They both claim the exact same compound.
Nearly a year apart. That definitely sounds like a distant filing date scenario.
It is. So now let's apply the one ready rule, practice 2. Let's say inventor A's application is ready for allowance, but inventor B is still fighting rejections.
Okay.
Inventor A's application, because it's the ready one, will just issue as a patent.
So inventor A gets their patent, which now stands in the way of inventor B.
It's a block.
So inventor B finally gets their issues sorted out. What happens when they try to move forward?
Well, because their filing dates were more than 6 months apart, and inventor A is now a patent holder. Inventor B is immediately the junior party. They have to overcome that patent.
They have to prove they invented the compound before January 1st, 2024.
Before inventor A's filing date. And if they can show that, they might trigger a formal application versus patent interference. All guided, of course, by the IPS.
So this whole IPS-guided process ensures 2 things. First, you get fair, standardized handling from an expert.
Yes.
And second, you actively avoid delays by using those 6-month and ready rules to just keep things moving.
That is the absolute core takeaway of MPEP Section 2302. These guidelines really just reinforce the need for expert oversight and procedural uniformity in these rare but very complex cases.
Yeah.
It's about handling them according to those established pre-AIA legal standards.
So here's a final thought for you to consider. Given how complex and rare these cases are, less than 1%, what stands out to you most about the USPTO relying on a specialized consultant, the IPS, instead of just training every examiner to do it? It's something to mull over on your own.
And with that, we'd like to, again, extend a special thank you to Mike Shepard, the creative director who organized this entire audio series.
And one last time, our disclaimer. This summary of the MPEP was generated using AI tools, including ChatGPT and Notebook LM, and it may contain errors or omissions. It's provided for general educational and informational purposes only. It is not legal advice or a substitute for formal instruction. For authoritative guidance, please consult the official MPEP, a qualified instructor, or a registered patent practitioner.